Hey everyone, and welcome to the Top 10 Project. Normally, this is where I go back and watch like 5 movies from a previous year and update my top 10 of that year and then give it a score at the end. I'm still doing that with this episode, but this episode is not about an old year. This episode is about 2023. So my normal watch 5 movies rule did not apply to this one. In fact, I double checked to see how many movies I watched technically. From the moment in December I said I'm going to start checking out movies that I should see before I do my top 10, and I watched, not counting movies that I did for Screams After Midnight, I watched 15 movies up until this top 10 recording. So very different. It's why it's been a while since the last episode. I'm still planning on doing 2003 as the next top 10 project episode, but once I got October out the way, and by the time I was ready to start thinking about the next one, I was like, you know what? It's time to do 2023. I want to get into this. And there's, every reason to just include this as part of this series rather than make it its own thing. Of course, we want to see where this ranks with the other years. Why wouldn't we? So, yeah, there's not much to really say then, other than I'm going to give my top 10 movies. And at the end, I'll give them a score and see how it compares to the previous years that I've done in this format. Number 10 is The Holdovers, directed by Alexander Payne. This is a sort of drama with a little bit of comedy, which is set over the sort of the Christmas winter break at a private school where Paul Giamatti plays this sort of curmudgeon, kind of asshole teacher who is no nonsense and seemingly hates all the kids that he teaches. And it's a bonding story with him and this kid who's left there over Christmas. The holdovers, of course, refers to all the kids who don't get to go home with their families for the holiday, and they're left there. And he's the teacher who's been tasked with sort of babysitting them over this period. It's very much a kind of an old school drama, and I actually really appreciated that it is even shot like an old movie, not just because it's a period piece and it looks like it was made in the time it was made, but everything down to the Universal logo at the start is old school. It's the one from the 80s. It's very much a character drama. It's very much a movie about two characters who kind of need to balance each other out. You've got the old guy who refuses to have any fun, and you've got the young kid who wants to do nothing but fun and doesn't want to take any responsibility. You can kind of see how the arcs of both characters who hate each other at the start of the movie, might evolve, and how those arcs might become defined as the movie goes on. Honestly, this is a movie of good character writing and good performances. Like, this movie hinges on its performances of its lead actors. There's also a supporting role of like the cook who also stays behind. And she's got kind of a tragic story and her backstory about her own son who is no longer with her. And that also feeds into the themes of this story, a big one being regret and sort of grief and those kinds of things. And I think it's a really good sort of low-key Christmas movie. I think by the end of it, I was like, oh, I can see people watching this as not like a happy, feel-good movie during the holidays, but if they want something to kind of counteract all of those more uplifting movies, not to say there's no uplifting elements to this, but it's very good at what it is. And I've only seen a couple of Alexander Payne films, and this is definitely the one that I've liked the most out of the ones I've seen. The others being The Descendants, which I thought was okay, and Election, which I know people really like. Maybe I need to watch it again, but I don't remember feeling that strongly about it when I saw it a long time ago. So I've not seen some of his bigger movies, admittedly, so I should probably check those out at some point. But Holdovers was a very good character drama with great performances from its two leads. Number 9 is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, directed by Joaquim Dos Santos, Justin K. Thompson, and Kemp Powers. Apologies if I mispronounced anything there. So this is a sequel. It's an animated movie. It's a sequel to Into the Spider-Verse. And I think what surprised me the most about this is that I actually felt so strongly about it, despite the fact that almost every other superhero movie from the last like 3 or 4 years has left me feeling nothing but apathy, pretty much. So I was kind of hesitant to see this, even though it looked like it was just as good as the first one, even though people were saying it was as good as the first one, if not better. I still found myself dragging my feet, so I never saw this at the movies. This was something I saw catching up, sort of early January, more or less, and I was so relieved that within like 5 minutes, the sheer style of the movie, the visuals, the way it was edited to the music, the way it focused on Spider-Gwen and her kind of like story to start things off with. All of it just kind of sucked me in so quickly that I was like, you know what? I was a fool for being worried. This just shows that if you're doing something interesting with a superhero property, that, funnily enough, one of the things that's bogged down a lot of the other stuff is that it's all doing big universe-wide things, and they're bringing in multiverses into some of the MCU stuff. This technically, obviously, is doing multiverse stuff. It's literally in the title, but its entire plot is revolving around the idea of the multiverse. So it feels like it's more inherent and important to the story as it's going through it. Miles is a very likable character, of course. There's a lot of good family stuff with him and his parents in this one. The one big thing to warn anyone about this movie is that it is very much a cliffhanger. It is a to be continued. It literally says to be continued at the end. This is not a complete finished story. It's going to be finished with part 3. I think I appreciated how it really played with this idea of destiny and kind of what his parents expect of him. And ultimately, Miles trying to prove himself kind of feeds into the feelings you maybe you often have as a teenager sometimes, of like feeling like you don't belong, like you're not worthy of actually being anything, that you are some kind of anomaly. The movie feeds into that really well, but on top of that, obviously it has all of the style that you expected from the first film, and it is beautiful, it's bombastic, it's pretty, it's full of energy, it's full of creativity in a way that a lot of superhero movies in a lot of recent years have not had that creativity. One or two exceptions aside, right? I'm talking about the sort of the broad picture here. So I still highly recommend Across the Spider-Verse, sorry. It's very good. I found myself pleasantly, and I shouldn't have been surprised, but I still was surprised because I kind of expected my fatigue of like Marvel to really kind of hamper it, and that kind of happened with the Spider-Man 2 video game. It was a solid game, but I felt kind of just indifferent to the story because I'm just sick of doing those things. This managed to feel fresh the entire time somehow, and I could probably watch it again and try and diagnose exactly how it's doing that, but on a first time viewing, I'm just happy to say that I felt that the entire time, and it's a very, very high quality. Number 8 is Infinity Pool, directed by Brandon Cronenberg. Oh, Cronenberg's at it again. I actually really liked Crimes of the Future that his dad did just the previous year. I think that was 2022. But I really like Possessor, which was Brandon Cronenberg's previous film, and I went into this very optimistic. It looked good from the whatever I saw from it. Much like Possessor, it's definitely a movie for adults. It is not a light-hearted romp. It is a hard-hitting look at a particular topic. Possessor was, really about violence, and this is kind of about violence as well, but it doesn't focus on that as specifically as Possessor did. It feels wild to even give the premise of this one away, to be honest, because I didn't know what the premise was when I went in to see it. But it stars the Stellan Skarsgård. I was trying to think what Skarsgård it was. And Mia Goth, right? Those are your leads. And it very much deals with this idea of class systems, but more importantly, the idea of what someone can do, or what awful things someone would do if they think there are no consequences. So it's very much talking about the rich and how they get away with a lot of things, but much like a lot of science fiction, and this is sort of science fiction with a bit of horror, this makes it literal. This literally takes away the consequences for doing bad things and explores that. And it's quite haunting how someone is seduced by it, and then kind of like how that turns when they realize kind of what that means and where it goes with that. It's got lots of very memorable moments and visuals. We did this one on the Atomic Cinema Experiment. In fact, this was David's first episode of the Atomic Cinema Experiment, just to throw him out of the deep end, which was a joke we made right at the start of that episode because it's called Infinity Pool. But it's got great cinematography from Brandon Cronenberg. It does a couple of little sort of art housey kind of things where it'll sort of, the camera will start upside down and spin around at the start. It kind of draws you into the story with cinematography, and then lets the story itself kind of take center stage through its characters. And it's one that we had a great discussion about, talking about what everything meant, because everything did mean something. It's purely science fiction in that way. So Yeah, that's Infinity Pool. It is definitely a darker sci-fi movie that I would recommend. Number 7 is Bottoms, directed by Emma Seligman, if I'm saying that right. Yeah, this is a complete surprise for me. I put this on expecting to watch a forgettable teen comedy and I would never think about it again. I'd heard good things, don't get me wrong, but I've heard good things in the past about other teen comedies and watched them and felt like, same old thing, and that nothing really stuck out to me. I was very, very taken aback by how much I was into the humor of this movie, but mostly it kind of had that just enough of a little satirical edge on top of what it was doing, because it's effectively your sort of teen comedy where a group of characters do something kind of outrageous with the end goal being to get laid, right? That's the movie. But the two lead characters are lesbians. And what they do to kind of hopefully get laid is start a fight club with other women under the guise that it's for like self-defense training or something along those lines. And it's so kind of absurd, but it has a little bit of that satire that kind of shines through in a lot of how the characters interact, the way that they bring up certain topics. It's nowhere near as like hard edged as something like Assassination Nation, but like it has just a little taste of that, just a little bit where everything that they were joking about always felt like it was saying something about the subject they were talking about. And I also think that by the time some of the characters who had been duped into this fight club and realize why the main characters are doing it, and I won't spoil anything here really, but you know that moment in like these sort of comedies when like the girls realize that the guys have done something kind of bad to trick them, and then that's kind of usually your third act where they need to feel bad and they need to prove that they're actually decent people by the end. Maybe not, we'll see how it goes. It kind of hits a little different when we get to that point in Bottoms, because the main characters are also women and they've done this to other women, so it kind of hits in this weirdly kind of hard spot that it just feels like it has a bit more to it. It feels like they've crossed this line that they should have known better not to cross, and it kind of works in a way where there's a little bit more depth to it, whilst it's also very funny. I think the two leads are very funny. I didn't really know them all that much, and I'm impressed that I found them both funny, because one of them, Rachel Sennett, I think her name is, she was in a movie the previous year called Bodies, Bodies, Bodies that I absolutely hated, because I hated all the characters and how they talk to each other. So it's nice to know that that wasn't just like I was always going to feel that way about her work. I actually thought she and the other lead here were very, very good. So very, very pleasantly surprised. It was making me laugh a lot. I think it had a good pacing. I think it built up to a really great climax, which appealed to me both as a resolution to the story, but also appealed to me as someone who likes to watch a lot of absurd violence in movies. So I recommend Bombs. I'm surprised to say it, but I do. Number 6 is The Iron Claw, directed by Sean Durkin. So this is a movie based on a famous family in wrestling. I mean, I don't know how to say this. It's a very tragic story. It's a very tragic story where it's made up of these brothers who were trained to wrestle by their father, and he was determined to sort of live through them and have one of them win the world title, because he never got to do that, specifically the NWA world title. And basically it's a tragedy because almost all of the sons, the brothers, end up dead. And I don't think that's a spoiler. Like, this is the tragedy of the Von Erichs. Like, that's the family name, the Von Erichs. They're very famous. The most famous one from a sort of mainstream audience is probably Kerry Von Erich, because he was Texas Tornado in the WWF back at the start of the 90s. He was the sort of, he got into the biggest stage, if you will. But it's this tragic story of a father who is too hard and drives his sons too much. And from what I understand, the movie actually softened things a little bit. In fact, the movie even takes out a whole person. It takes out a brother. There was like another brother involved that had a tragic story. And apparently one of the reasons why they took it out is because they thought, one, it would be too depressing based on everything else that already happens, but also that the audience would start to question how true it was. But that's the irony here, the truth being stranger than the fiction, and that this did all happen, but more happened. There was more. The dad did even worse things. There was even more tragedy. But it's really well made. It's superbly directed. Anytime they're in a wrestling ring, the depth of field shots on the ropes as they're bouncing off and on, the way it sort of handles the material by never actually explaining a lot of the wrestling stuff, which I actually think is for the best. If you know wrestling stuff, you'll get a lot of it. And if you don't, I think it gets across the need to know information, like some of the strengths and weaknesses that the various brothers have as part of that industry. But that's not really what it's about. That's like the vehicle that the dad wants to push them through. But it's really a family drama, and it's all told from the lens of Kevin Von Erich, played by Zac Efron. Not a name that I ever thought I'd be praising all that much, but he's actually very good in this. It's a very emotional performance, and I was enjoying what it was doing. I thought it was really, really well directed. It feels really old school in its presentation, much like Holdovers. It felt like it was going for a style to kind of feel of the time it was set in, which is the sort of tail end of the 70s, but mostly the 80s into a little bit of the early 90s. Is that by the end, there's some really big swings taken just with the creative ideas with how to present certain moments and how to show the emotional parts of certain moments that I thought were restrained in the sense that they weren't doing a lot of it throughout the movie, but there's just a couple of big things, and there's one big scene towards the end where it feels like, oh, this is a very artistic expression of something they wanted to show here. That I think hit really hard. Like, I think the first half was a really solid, well-directed drama and well-performed, but the second half of the story, where obviously it's a lot more tragic, really works and really does a lot of great, interesting things. I think I appreciate that there was always kind of this presentation of the brotherhood, of this bond between them that they kind of try and sell early on, and how they kind of try and sort of give a little bit of hope through that, even in the darkest times as the movie goes on. I did appreciate. I can't imagine like someone getting into this having no idea what this story is. Like I have to imagine just how, if you're not prepared for a tragedy when you go to see the Iron Claw, I can't imagine like what you think coming out of it. Jesus, you're probably thinking, they made this darker for the movie. No, they toned it down. They made it. They actually took out some even more things just to make it palpable for an audience. So, but I do recommend it. I recommend Iron Claw. I thought it was really well done. Number 5 is Oppenheimer, directed by Christopher Nolan. Obviously, I expected to like this. I was hoping I'd like it. Nolan's output last few years, people were very mixed on Tenet. I quite liked it, with its faults, but I did quite like what it was doing. Dunkirk, I wasn't into. Dunkirk's the one Nolan film that I just flat out dislike. Not because I think it's poorly made. It's obviously exceptionally well done on a technical level. I just didn't connect with anything in it. It's just kind of cold to me. Oppenheimer is definitely his kind of big return to form in quite some time. It feels that way anyway after his last 2 movies. It's this 3-hour epic about the creation of the atomic bomb and, really a character story of Oppenheimer himself. This is a movie that is obsessed, much like Nolan is, with non-linear storytelling. There's a lot of cutting around, both before and after for the bomb's creation, and it kind of sort of all comes together by the end, and it's like an onion kind of raveling and then unraveling, or unraveling then raveling again. I don't know, whatever way you want to put it. And I think what really sets it over the edge is how it tackles getting into Oppenheimer's head during key moments and what he might have, or maybe he's on the record as how he felt in certain moments. It really sold this idea of the weight of what had been done with the Trinity tests and dropping the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And it never actually shows you those events, of course, because Oppenheimer himself never got to see those events. It very much ties it all to, not that he's in every scene necessarily, but it never sort of betrays things that he would be aware of or know of. It's all just kind of from that perspective. He made this feel like a blockbuster, but without ever jeopardizing what the story actually was to do it. He just makes it feel big. He makes it feel like an event that we all have to see, without, you know, oh, there's suddenly a big CG like dragon or something coming in, or I don't know, like I don't know what I'm trying to say other than just he made it feel special in like a cinema event that we couldn't miss. And honestly, it lived up to that hype for me, and I think everyone should see it. Number 4 is Past Lives, directed by Celine Song. So I'd heard a lot of great things about Past Lives before I saw it about a month ago, and I expected kind of a heartfelt drama about romance or whatever, but I didn't really look into it too in depth. I just heard it was good, and I heard it might break people if they have unrequited love or something like that. The story is about a young girl, basically friends with a boy in Korea, but then after like there's maybe a little bit of a childhood romance, she moves to Canada and grows up there instead, and that's kind of it. But these two characters end up sort of communicating and Skyping when they're sort of college age, a number of years later, and it kind of sparks something. But then their lives go on, and it kind of goes from there. And I don't want to spoil too much, except to say that this is a movie that is extremely great in its direction and performances, but particularly the direction and the writing and how it's able to capture the awkwardness of various like social situations that these characters find themselves in, but not in a way where it's cringy. Not in like it's not like you're watching The Office and Michael Scott says something uncomfortable that everyone feels bad about. It's not like that. It's characters where you can kind of sympathize with every character on the screen. You understand where they're all coming from. This is not a movie where you're rooting for two characters to get together and there's like an obstacle, you know, another boyfriend in the way who's kind of a dickhead, and you're waiting for the main character to realize he's a dickhead. It's not that. It's a far more nuanced film that's just about dealing with the fact that life doesn't always go the way that everyone expects it to, and certainly maybe not even wants it to, but you sort of deal with it. And this movie's kind of about the longing for what could have been in some ways. It's more complex than that. It's kind of hard to summarize this in like a couple of minutes just to sort of sell people on seeing it, but it captures it really well. And I think there's definitely something for almost anyone to find relatable in this movie. Whether it's a long distance relationship, whether it's the idea of like an old either teenage or childhood romance that you kind of wish didn't end, or whether it's because you just knew someone who had to move away and maybe you hoped something would happen with them. Like all of these different things, you can probably find something to relate to. If nothing else, the idea that maybe you care about someone and now they're with someone else, that's a big one. And often when that happens in a movie or a TV show, it's usually just a cheap ploy for drama because, you know, it's the love triangle. Nothing in this ever feels like that. You know, obviously there's some really, you know, simple symbolism of at one point that when they're kids, they go up separate staircases, sort of out, you know, not in a building. It's like, you know, two sets of stairs going up a hill, and it sort of forks and they go up the different sides. And it's like very symbolic, of course, that they're separating at this point. But there's stuff like that throughout the whole movie that does such a good job of just selling the feelings of the characters in the moment. And I felt like I was in the room with some of these characters throughout some very emotionally complex scenes that ultimately, you know, by the time that the movie ended and it kind of makes its final beats, it's a very complicated feeling. It's not as simple as having a happy ending, a sad ending, or even a bittersweet ending, really. It's far more complex than that. And it makes it feel like it's, you know, sometimes movies have morals, sometimes movies have like simple messages that, and that's not to like say anything bad about it, but it's, you know, a good simple message can make a great movie. In fact, I'd argue that most great movies have a nice simple message at its core. But this is less about having like a message and more about just kind of examining what humans go through and some of the pain that comes from these situations. And it's very relatable. And yeah, it kind of, I think it blew a lot of people away this past year, and I don't think, like, it was almost like it wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be, but what it ended up being felt very unique and very original. Not so much even in like the character setup of what it's doing, but just in how it handled the material and how it told its story of its characters. So yeah, I gotta give Past Lives a lot of props. It's one that I think's even, it's. I think if you'd asked me a month ago, it was probably a spot or two lower, but it's kind of stuck in my head, and I've kind of thought about how just authentic some of those moments in that movie feel. It's so down to earth and so like able to capture that. It's like it's almost down to earth, but kind of has this air of like nostalgia about it at the same time, where you can kind of feel like one of those like night times in the city where you're just sort of looking at the lights, and you can sort of like pin a memory to that kind of vibe because something important happened at that time. This movie kind of has just scenes that feel like that. It's really impressive. So that's Past Lives. Number 3 is The Zone of Interest, directed by Jonathan Glazer. So I really loved Under the Skin, which is a decade old at this point, but that was the film he did with Scarlett Johansson, and that was like one that completely came out of nowhere and just blew me away. So I was looking forward to this. As soon as I found out he had a movie coming out, I was like, yes, I don't care what it is. I'm invested. I'm interested. Give it to me. And then I happened to glance at what it was, and it's the story of a commander or commandant, whatever the rank was, who works at Auschwitz and has a house right next to the camp. Like literally the garden wall of the house is sharing the wall with the edge of Auschwitz. That is what the movie is. It's a very art house movie, and it's a very slow art house movie. It starts with like 3 minutes of black, with there's just some like noises, and I could almost tell, like I saw this in the movies, and I could almost tell the normies around me were getting like restless, thinking something was wrong, and I'm just rubbing my hands together, going, "Yes, yes, feed me the art house." But no, to be serious, like it's a very stark film that's not got much of a plot. This is not a plot movie. This is a movie almost in the way that Past Lives was like looking at these sort of romantic and awkward situations and sort of finding the humanity in them. This is like almost kind of the horrific version of that, which is seeing the mundane parts of the lives of people who are part of one of the most horrific things that have ever happened in human history. It's this commander who's just casually talking with others about ways to make the camp more efficient. And what are they talking about there? They're talking about making the incinerators more efficient. Yeah, the sound mix. I got to talk about the sound mix. You just hear in the distance at times some shouting or a gunshot or just noises that are coming. You never see inside the camp. Never really, right? You never see prisoners inside. I was actually shocked to see this was a 12A, or in the US a PG-13. It's not something that shows a whole lot in terms of that. The way that the characters, the family that are sort of living here, they're talking about their mundane problems and like, oh, I want to go on holiday again. It's been a while. All of that stuff there's just this, you're just sort of just uncomfortable the whole time. There's just something kind of sickening. And there's these little hints of the more nefarious things that are going on that are sprinkled throughout. But it's very much a mood film of just sitting back and letting the camera work. The direction is impeccable. There's these great shots sort of to emphasize like the wall between the house and the camp, and just some of just these great vista shots of like them at the water, but just up the river there's this horrible thing going on. And it's very much about making you sit with people that you detest the entire time. Not really giving like some big plot where there's like ups and swings and like a crescendo to a climax, although it does do something really interesting at the ending, which I thought was quite powerful. I really liked that. Again, it's very much about just sitting in the mundanity of something really awful happening and how they're trying to ignore it, if not actively participate in it. But, I think a great little example of this is quite early on in the film. The wife character points out that they've put flowers all over their side of the wall so that eventually when it blossoms, it'll hide the wall. And it couldn't be a perfect, more symbolic thing of them just hiding this awful thing that they're doing and benefiting from and trying to make it look pretty on their side. But they can never stop hearing the sounds. They can never stop seeing the smoke coming from the incinerators. So very powerful. Again, it's very art house. If that's not something that sounds like you can sit through, then I'd steer clear of it. But yeah, Zone of Interest is fantastic. Number 2 is Poor Things, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, and I'm probably butchering that name, so apologies. But I saw The Lobster. It's the only film from him that I think I've seen before. I never got around to Killing of a Sacred Deer, although I should check it out. But this is a movie that's kind of Frankenstein-esque. Emma Stone plays a woman who has been effectively reanimated in some form. I won't get into it because it's really not the important part. But it's a film with a very strong visual style. It's full of these big sets that are supposed to look very theatrical, and therefore they don't necessarily look real. There's entire towns they go to that don't look real, but it's never supposed to quite look real. It's always meant to have this kind of very artistic, over-the-top kind of expressionism thing going for it. But she plays this character who effectively ages very quickly and is kind of... It's all about, like, basically her sexual awakening and then how she pursues that, how she then uses that in different ways, and how she ultimately is used by some men, but then ultimately is able to sort of flip that on its head and kind of question things because she's able to and think in a way that other people don't and doesn't just accept what is, kind of thing. I thought it was wonderful. I was kind of... I expected to like it, but I wasn't expecting to just be kind of in love with it the way I was. This is very much a film that is for adults. It is full of sex. It is full of full frontal nudity. It's full of all these things, but it's also insanely funny. Like, I was cackling with laughter a lot during this. Emma Stone was absolutely killing it, as was Mark Hulk, Mark Red. I've forgotten his name, doesn't matter. William Dafoe's in there. He's kind of the Victor Frankenstein type character. They're all very funny. I was thinking and quoting various lines after I saw it. But again, at its core, there's this very good story about this woman kind of taking power in a way that those around her don't expect. And I think that crescendos really well to a climax where kind of another element's introduced towards the end that kind of just really helps hit those themes home again really hard. And I really loved that throughout. But it's constantly taking this, uncomfortable subject, because sex is an uncomfortable subject by and large to a lot of people, and it's constantly making it funny. It's constantly having just fun with how it presents a character who's engaging in it effectively for the first time, and what the expectations of it are, and then how her opinions on it when she realizes that it differs from a lot of other people. The way it handles all those things I thought was really well done, and I always felt like it knew exactly what it was trying to do and say, and it feels like, it felt like it was being risque, but always with this sense of like a confident hand of like, this is what we're trying to do with it. If you want to critique it and say that it is, it's written and directed by men, so it's arguably also from the male gaze, I think that's fair to point out. It absolutely is. But I don't necessarily think that takes away from the things that it's trying to say. And certainly it seems like Emma Stone was more than gung-ho for everything that were thrown at her. It feels like she put a lot of passion into this role. So, yeah, I highly recommend Poor Things. It's kind of like, I saw this in early January, mid-January. I went to the movies. I was like, oh, it's playing, I'll go see it. And I kind of just felt like, oh, cinema's okay. Movies are fine. Movies will be good. Like, we've had a couple of rough years because of the pandemic, but movies will be fine. And number 1 is Godzilla -1. Holy shit. So, as much as I just said for Poor Things that I felt like cinema was back, I kind of felt that already in December. I was so happy that I got to go see this at the cinema because I didn't think I was going to. I knew the US was getting a release. It didn't seem like the UK was, and then it felt like it was only getting a couple of showings. It was a really awkward time that I don't normally go, but I made an effort to go anyway. And they ended up doing a whole week of showings after anyway that they hadn't planned on originally, because people were so interested in seeing it, because it was getting such good buzz, because people cared. And I like Godzilla movies. I like Shin Godzilla. I like Godzilla 2014. Obviously, I love the original, as a lot of the old sequels that I like. They're not all great movies, but I love a good number of them. This movie went above and beyond. It punched above its weight. Like, Shin Godzilla was a really great example of a modern Godzilla movie, but it still felt like it didn't have like core characters to really care about. It's the one thing that's kind of plagued all these types of kaiju monster movies, really, is that fundamentally you never care about the humans as much as the monster. And I think what Godzilla Minus One does so well is that it gives us a main character with an arc who you want to root for, and that by the end you're hoping for a certain outcome. Godzilla himself is so menacing. They do kind of a recreation of the original like city rampage of the first film, but obviously with modern effects and sensibilities. It's shot beautifully. I think the direction's really good. But yeah, they give us this character who is supposed to be a kamikaze pilot in World War II. It's set right after World War II, and he didn't go through with it. And he kind of lives with that shame, and the movie's got a lot to say about that and how he can't forgive himself, how he feels ashamed for himself. And it's got a lot to say about the country of Japan expecting people to do that in the first place. It has a lot of really interesting things that it goes through, as it's, ultimately it's anti-war and all these kind of things, but it goes through so much of this. But the Godzilla scenes themselves are so good. They use the classic main theme at just the right times. The destruction scenes, they're so good when they happen, but I really can't emphasize enough how much I was into the character story. And that is, like, the original Godzilla is still the better film. Like, the original 1954 Godzilla is this classic. It is seminal. It is a movie made less than a decade after the atomic bombs that was trying to talk through that experience. It's so important from a historical point of view, and it is so well made as well, that I don't think anything could ever actually touch it. But I will say that I think the character story in this is probably even better than the original film. It's probably the best I've ever gotten the characters in a Godzilla movie. So thrilled that I could go see it in the movies, because I'd never seen a Japanese Godzilla in the cinema before, so that felt like a big deal. But then when I actually saw the movie and I got to the end and the title appears again at the end, and the audience started clapping, which is not a normal thing to see in the UK. I'll say that right now. That was strange, and it was also sold out as well. Like, there was only a few showings, and it was I saw it like the first night it was playing, so it makes sense that it was maybe busier. But like, that was the thing. Like, I booked tickets for that in advance, and I never do that for movies because I expected that it might sell out because it was such a limited release. So yeah, I was super pumped by it. Again, this was one that we did in the Atomic Cinema Experiment, our sci-fi podcast, and just gushed about it for like 2 hours. It was so good. So, I think there's arguments that a couple of the movies that I've had, at 2, 3, and 4 maybe are arguably better movies. I think this is the one that I loved the most from 2023, and it is exceptionally well made. So absolutely, there you go. That is my top 10 of 2023. So now that I've done my top 10, I can show my scores on the screen, and you can see that it's a very strong year. I gave out, several 9s. 5 of my top 10 were 9 out of 10, and then 4 8.5s and an 8 out of this top 10. It's very consistent on the high end, which is very good. It's definitely one of the best years we've had in quite a few. I will say the one thing that is kind of, a bit of a letdown this past year was maybe the horror side of things, because 2022 was surprisingly very good for horror. Not necessarily movies as a whole, but for horror movies, it was actually quite excellent. And it was kind of the opposite this year, where movies in general I found to be very, very good, but the horror side was a bit lacking. Infinity Pool's kind of a horror movie. I did enjoy Evil Dead Rise. I did enjoy Talk to Me, but it's definitely a much shorter list than it has been in some other years. So, with that said, though, I do give a score based on all these ratings. It's quite simple. I do an average of the 10, but then add on some bonus points. So, 10s get plus 3 points per movie. No 10s. It's quite tough to give something a 10 right away as well, which is maybe why. It's entirely possible that something here could maybe rise to that with more viewings over more years, but certainly nothing that I was going to give that full fat 10 out of 10 right away. But 5 9s is exceptional, and then 4 8.5s right after it is so good. So yeah, so there's 5 bonus points here on top of the average, which gets us to 13.7, which is excellent, and it actually slots us in 3rd place out of the 4 years now that we've done on Top 10 Project, coming ahead of 1999 and below 84 and 76, which probably doesn't look amazing because it's, you know, number 3 out of 4 right now, but like I said, I do think this is one of the best years in the last while. Like, I think we'd have to go back to at least 2019 to have a year that I think matches it. But even then, maybe even further. So, super cool stuff. I'm really pleased with movies in 2023. I'm sure there's other gems that I've not got to yet that I'll find and love as well. There's always that chance down the line. But exceptional year, and I'm really happy with it. So, this has been the Top 10 Project for 2023. Hopefully you enjoyed my top 10. Hopefully maybe you got a couple of recommendations that you want to check out. Let me know what your top 10s of 2023 are in the comments. It's always nice to see them. So thank you very much for joining me. You can, of course, support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep all the content coming, help keep the lights on. Or, of course, you can just hit the like button, which is free and easy to do, and everyone should do that because it means more people will find the channel and we can grow, and maybe it'll never end. Well, except from, you know, death. I'll eventually die. There's nothing I can do about that. But until then, you know. So thank you very much. I'll see you guys next time. Like I said, 2003 is the next Top 10 Project episode that I've got planned. I don't know exactly when it'll be. It'll be ready when it's ready, when I've watched the 5 movies. But I will say that I'm also planning some non-Top 10 Project Top 10s as well. And you might see the first one of those before you see the next Top 10 Project. Because I always like having more things to work on, because the creativity is a curse. But anyway, thank you very much. I'll see you guys next time. Keep watching movies. Goodbye.